There is a place on this planet where the sun has never once reached, not dimmed, not filtered, never there. Below about 1,000 meters, the ocean is in permanent total darkness. No day, no night, just cold pressure and silence stretching for miles in every direction. And somehow, that is exactly where light is most common. Most creatures living in these depths can create their own glow. They generate bright living light inside their bodies through simple chemistry, no sun required. A tiny movement can trigger sudden flashes that ripple outward like underwater lightning. Soft glows appear and disappear in strange patterns. Entire communities survive in a world where the only light comes from the animals themselves. They decide exactly when to turn it on and when to hide it again. Here, light is not something that just happens, it is something they control. Some dangle glowing lures right in front of their mouths, others fire quick bursts that light up for a heartbeat, then vanish back into blackness. Some pulse like distant signals, while others shine steady and calm in the endless night. Every flash costs precious energy in a place where food is hard to find and survival is never easy. Still, the deeper you go, the more this living light fills the darkness. So why does light become more common exactly where light disappears? What is the darkness doing that keeps pulling life toward it? Tonight, we explore that surprising mystery, how the deep ocean turns endless night into its own secret light show, and what that strange reversal reveals about life in the harshest places on Earth. At the surface, the ocean seems open and illuminated, a shifting mirror that gathers the sky and breaks it into restless patterns. Light pours in freely here, scattering across waves, slipping between ripples, reaching downward in soft, fading shafts. For a short distance, this brightness lingers, supporting motion, color, and life that depends on the steady presence of the sun. But the ocean does not hold that light for long. As depth increases, brightness begins to thin almost imperceptibly at first. Then, with quiet certainty, around 200 meters, the change becomes undeniable. Colors lose their clarity, reds dissolving into dull browns, yellows fading into muted greens, until only shades of blue remain. Even that final color weakens as the descent continues, as if the water itself is slowly absorbing every trace of day. The world narrows into dim outlines, then into silhouettes, then into something even less defined. Beyond 1,000 meters, the transformation is complete. There is no lingering glow, no softened twilight, no distant shimmer from above. Light does not exist here in any natural form. It has been fully consumed by the layers above, leaving behind a space untouched by sunrise or sunset. Time no longer carries visual markers. There is no morning, no evening, only a continuous and unbroken darkness that stretches outward in every direction. In this environment, the familiar foundation of life disappears. Plants cannot survive without sunlight, and without plants, the base of most ecosystems is gone. There is no photosynthesis, no steady conversion of light into energy, no widespread production of food from below. Instead, the deep ocean depends on what drifts down from far above, small fragments of organic matter descending slowly through the water column, scattered and uncertain. Each particle becomes valuable, part of a quiet rain that may or may not arrive. The physical conditions grow more severe with every meter. Pressure increases steadily, pressing inward with a force that would collapse unadapted bodies instantly. Temperatures fall toward near freezing, held in a narrow range that rarely changes. Movement slows, reactions become measured, and every action must justify the energy it consumes. Nothing is wasted here. There is no excess, no abundance, only careful balance. Food, when it appears, is unpredictable. A single fallen organism from the surface can sustain life for days or even weeks, drawing creatures from surrounding darkness toward its brief presence. Between these rare events, long stretches of scarcity define existence. Survival depends not on speed or strength alone, but on efficiency, patience, and the ability to endure absence. Despite these constraints, life does not fade. It adapts, reshapes itself, and settles into forms that match the stillness and pressure around it. Bodies become softer, structures more flexible, movements slower and more deliberate. Senses shift away from reliance on sight, leaning instead on subtle vibrations, chemical traces, and faint disturbances in the water. It is within this setting, where sunlight has no influence and resources arrive without pattern, that a different kind of presence begins to emerge, not imposed from above, but generated from within. In a place defined by the absence of light, something else takes its place, woven directly into the bodies of the creatures that live there. The darkness itself does not resist this change. It holds it, surrounds it, and gives it meaning. In such a world, even the smallest glow carries weight, shaping interactions, guiding movement, and altering outcomes in ways that daylight never needed to consider. Numbers begin to take shape long before any individual creature is clearly understood. Not precise counts, but careful estimates drawn from years of observation, brief encounters, and fragments of evidence gathered in a place that reveals itself only in passing. Again and again, those numbers settle into a pattern that feels almost unlikely at first, then quietly undeniable. In the deep ocean, the majority of animals do not simply exist within darkness. They produce light of their own. The proportion rises past 70% in many studied regions, a figure that continues to hold even as new species are recorded. In certain layers of the water column, especially where life gathers in drifting communities, the percentage appears to climb even higher. It becomes difficult to find organisms that do not possess some capacity for illumination. The expectation shifts without announcement. Instead of asking which creatures glow, the more natural assumption becomes that they do. This widespread presence changes the structure of the environment itself. Light is no longer an occasional trait carried by a few unusual species. It becomes a shared characteristic woven into the daily interactions of countless forms of life. Small drifting organisms release faint pulses when disturbed, while larger animals carry more controlled sources within specialized tissues. Even delicate, transparent bodies hold the ability to produce brief signals that ripple outward before fading again. Across these depths, light takes on many forms. Some emissions are soft and constant, barely noticeable unless the surroundings are completely still. Others appear in quick, precise bursts, triggered by movement or contact. There are patterns that repeat with measured timing, sequences that resemble coded exchanges rather than random flashes. Each variation adds to a layered system that spreads through the water, connecting individuals that may never physically touch. Entire communities are shaped by this shared ability. Groups of organisms drift together, their combined light creating subtle fields that shift as currents carry them along. Predators and prey move through these spaces, interacting within a framework where visibility is controlled by the organisms themselves. The environment is no longer defined solely by physical conditions such as pressure or temperature. It is also defined by the presence of living light, continuously produced, continuously withdrawn. This concentration of bioluminescent life extends across vast areas of the ocean. From mid-water regions to the deepest known zones, the pattern repeats with remarkable consistency. The ocean becomes not just a habitat where light exists, but the largest continuous system on Earth, where light is generated by life itself. No forest, no grassland, No surface ecosystem matches this scale of biological illumination. The effect is cumulative. Each individual glow may be small, limited in range and duration, but together they form a persistent feature of the environment. Movement through these waters can trigger chains of light, one reaction leading to another, spreading outward through nearby organisms. What begins as a single disturbance can briefly reveal the presence of many others, each contributing its own signal to a larger display. Over time, this constant production of light shapes behavior and adaptation. Creatures evolve with the expectation that light will be present, even in a place where it does not originate from any external source. Sensory systems adjust, responses become more refined, and interactions grow more dependent on the ability to produce or detect these signals. The boundary between organism and environment becomes less distinct, as each contributes to the conditions experienced by the others. Within this vast and quiet system, light is no longer an exception or an anomaly. It becomes the prevailing condition, as fundamental to life here as water itself. There is a quiet contradiction unfolding in these depths, one that does not announce itself but slowly settles into awareness through repetition. The environment offers no natural light, no background glow, no external source to illuminate form or distance. In such conditions, vision loses the role it holds elsewhere. Eyes, when present, cannot rely on a steady field of information. Shapes do not appear unless something reveals them. Yet within this absence, light continues to appear again and again, not as a constant presence, but as deliberate moments shaped by living bodies. It does not belong to the surroundings, and it does not arrive from above. It is introduced, controlled, and then removed, as if the darkness itself is being briefly rewritten in small, precise intervals. This creates a situation that seems at first out of place. If sight has limited use, then producing light might appear unnecessary. Energy, already scarce, would be better conserved for movement, growth, or reproduction. The deep ocean does not reward waste. Every function must justify its cost, especially one as demanding as generating visible radiation through chemical reactions inside living tissue. And yet, the presence of light persists, widespread and consistent. It does not fade away as an inefficient trait. Instead, it becomes more common, more refined, more integrated into the structure of life. The deeper regions, where natural illumination is entirely absent, are also the regions where this ability is most frequently expressed. The contradiction begins to soften when light is no longer treated as a replacement for daylight, but as something entirely different. It is not used to recreate a bright environment or to fill the surroundings with continuous visibility. Instead, it appears in controlled amounts, shaped in time and direction, often lasting only long enough to achieve a specific outcome before vanishing again. In this way, vision does not disappear. It changes. It becomes dependent on brief events rather than constant input. A flash can reveal the outline of a nearby organism, then leave the space dark once more. A steady glow can define a boundary or signal presence without illuminating anything beyond it. Perception becomes tied to these moments, forming a kind of intermittent awareness rather than a continuous stream. Light also operates beyond vision alone. It interacts with behavior, influencing movement, distance, and timing. An organism that produces a pulse is not simply making itself visible. It is shaping the response of anything capable of detecting that signal. Even in a place where eyes are reduced or absent, other sensory systems can respond to the presence of light, integrating it with mechanical or chemical cues. The paradox, then, is not that light exists where it is unnecessary, but that its purpose is different from what might be expected. It is not meant to restore a lost condition. It is used as a tool, applied precisely, often briefly, and always with consequence. The darkness does not eliminate the value of light. It changes the rules under which that value is expressed. Over time, this relationship becomes stable. Organisms evolve not in spite of the darkness, but within it, using light as part of a system that depends on contrast, timing, and control. The absence of background illumination makes even the smallest signal distinct. A single point of light can carry meaning far beyond its size, precisely because nothing else competes with it. What first appears as a contradiction settles into a consistent pattern. Light does not belong to the environment, but to the life within it. And in that distinction, it gains a role that could not exist in a world already filled with brightness. Somewhere in the quiet distance, a small point of light appears, steady and deliberate, held in place as though it belongs there. It does not move with the slow drift of the surrounding water, and it does not fade like the brief pulses that pass through other organisms. It remains, a fixed signal in a space where nothing else holds position for long. For a smaller creature moving through this darkness, such a signal carries meaning. It suggests the presence of something familiar, something that might be consumed, something worth approaching. The glow does not reveal its source fully. It offers just enough information to guide movement while withholding everything else. This is one of the most refined uses of light in the deep ocean. Predators do not always chase. They wait, and they shape the behavior of others from a distance. The anglerfish provides a well-known example, extending a thin, flexible structure from its head, tipped with a luminous organ. The light sways gently, mimicking the subtle motions of living prey. It invites attention without urgency, allowing curiosity to close the distance. Yet the anglerfish is only one expression of a broader strategy. Across many species, similar techniques emerge, each adapted to the form and environment of the organism using them. Some predators produce clusters of small lights arranged in patterns that resemble drifting food particles. Others generate soft pulses that imitate the faint activity of smaller organisms, drawing in those that rely on such cues to locate meals. The illusion does not need to be perfect. It only needs to be convincing for a moment. In a place where encounters are rare and opportunities are uncertain, hesitation carries its own cost. A creature that ignores potential food may not find another chance soon. This balance between caution and necessity creates a narrow window that predators exploit with precision. In other cases, light is used not to attract, but to disrupt. A sudden flash can overwhelm the limited visual systems of nearby prey, creating a brief instant of confusion. During that instant, direction becomes unclear, movement loses coordination, and escape responses falter. The predator does not rely on speed alone, but on timing, using the flash to create a moment where control shifts. Some species combine both approaches. They begin with a subtle signal, drawing attention, then follow with a rapid burst that alters perception at close range. The transition is seamless, unfolding faster than the prey can adjust. What seemed like a harmless point of interest becomes the final moment before capture. This form of hunting extends beyond physical ability. It engages with perception, expectation, and response. Light becomes a medium through which predators influence decisions, guiding prey into positions where escape becomes unlikely. The interaction unfolds before contact is ever made, shaped by signals that carry intention without revealing it. Over time, these strategies become more refined, Predators evolve structures that allow precise control over brightness, duration, and pattern. The light is not constant, but carefully regulated, used only when it serves a purpose. Each emission is measured against its cost, balanced against the potential gain of a successful hunt. In this environment, survival depends not only on strength or speed, but on the ability to influence another organism's behavior from a distance. Light provides that reach, extending presence beyond the physical body, shaping the space around it in subtle but decisive ways. The result is a form of hunting that unfolds quietly, guided by signals rather than pursuit, where the boundary between perception and action becomes the place where outcomes are decided. Movement alone can reveal too much. In a place where distance offers little protection, even a slight change in motion can draw attention from something waiting nearby. For smaller creatures, escape cannot rely on speed alone. The surrounding space provides few places to hide, and the margin between detection and capture can be very narrow. In these moments, light becomes something entirely different from attraction or communication. It becomes a tool for disappearance. One approach unfolds in an instant. A creature senses the approach of a predator, not through sight, but through subtle disturbances in the water, a shift in pressure, a trace of motion carried across a short distance. In response, it releases a sudden cloud of glowing material into the surrounding space. The light expands outward, forming a loose, drifting shape that lingers just long enough to hold attention. For a brief moment, the predator is presented with something that appears to be the target, while the actual body has already changed direction and moved away. This luminous cloud does not need to be precise. Its purpose is not to imitate perfectly, but to interrupt the sequence of pursuit. The predator must process what it detects, adjust its movement, and decide how to respond. That small delay, measured in fractions of a second, can be enough. By the time the confusion clears, the original target is no longer where it was expected to be. Other species rely on rapid flashes instead of lingering clouds. These bursts of light occur in quick succession, creating a stuttering pattern that disrupts perception. The predator's ability to track movement becomes less reliable as each flash briefly resets the visual field. Direction becomes harder to judge, distance less certain. In that instability, the prey gains an advantage, not by outrunning the threat, but by making its path difficult to follow. There are also cases where the strategy becomes even more direct. Some organisms possess the ability to detach small, glowing portions of their own bodies. These fragments continue to emit light after separation, drifting independently through the water. To a pursuing predator, the detached piece offers a clear and immediate signal, something that appears to be the escaping organism itself. The predator may redirect toward this brighter, more visible target, allowing the original animal to move away in the opposite direction. The cost of such a tactic is not insignificant. Losing part of the body requires energy to repair or regenerate, and in an environment where resources are limited, this loss must be carefully balanced against the benefit of survival. Yet the persistence of this ability across multiple species suggests that the trade is often worthwhile. The immediate need to avoid capture outweighs the longer process of recovery. These methods share a common principle. Light is not used to reveal, but to mislead. It alters the information available to the predator, shaping its perception in a way that favors the prey. Instead of remaining passive within the encounter, the prey actively changes the conditions of the interaction, introducing signals that disrupt the expected outcome. Over time, These behaviors become refined, tuned to the sensory capabilities of those that hunt them. The intensity, duration, and pattern of the light are adjusted to maximize confusion while minimizing energy use. Each response is brief, controlled, and purposeful, unfolding only when needed. In this constant exchange between pursuit and escape, light becomes a language of interruption, a way to break the continuity of a hunt. It exists not as a steady presence, but as a momentary shift, a sudden alteration that reshapes the space between two moving bodies and determines which one continues on. Above, far beyond reach, a faint trace of light still filters down from distant waters, reduced to something soft and barely measurable. It does not illuminate the surroundings in any complete way, yet it creates a subtle gradient, a difference between what lies above and what drifts below. In this narrow band of contrast, outlines begin to matter. A body moving through this space can appear as a darker shape against the dim glow overhead, visible not because it produces light, but because it interrupts it. For creatures moving here, that silhouette becomes a quiet risk. Anything observing from below can detect the slight shadow, the interruption of the faint brightness filtering down. Even without clear vision, the difference is enough. Presence can be revealed without any movement beyond simple drifting. The shape itself becomes the signal. Some organisms respond to this problem in a way that seems almost contradictory at first. Instead of avoiding light, they produce it. Along the undersides of their bodies, they carry specialized structures capable of emitting a soft, controlled glow. This light is not bright or attention-grabbing. It is carefully measured, tuned to match the faint illumination coming from above. When the balance is correct, the effect is subtle but profound. The body no longer appears as a dark interruption against the dim background. Instead, it blends into the surrounding light field, its outline dissolving into the gradient. To an observer below, there is no clear boundary, no distinct form to follow. The organism becomes difficult to detect, not by hiding in shadow, but by removing the shadow entirely. This strategy is known as counter-illumination. It relies on precision rather than intensity. The emitted light must match the brightness and sometimes even the angle of the faint light above. Too strong, and the organism reveals itself as a glowing object. Too weak, and the silhouette remains visible. The balance must shift continuously as depth, angle, and external conditions change. To maintain this balance, many of these creatures possess sensory systems that detect the faint light filtering down from above. These sensors guide the adjustment of their own glow, allowing them to respond to subtle changes in the environment. The process unfolds continuously, often without any visible sign, as the organism fine-tunes its output to remain aligned with the surrounding light. The structures responsible for this emission, often called photophores, are arranged in patterns along the body, especially along the ventral surface. Their placement is not random. Each one contributes to the overall effect, filling in areas where shadow might otherwise form. Together, they create a uniform field of light that matches the gradient above. This approach is particularly effective in open water, where there are no solid surfaces to hide behind. In such spaces, traditional forms of concealment offer little advantage. There are no rocks, no plants, no fixed features to provide cover. The only available strategy is to reduce visibility within the water column itself. Counter-illumination transforms the organism from a distinct object into something that merges with its surroundings. It does not remove the body, but it alters how that body is perceived. The boundary between the organism and the environment becomes less defined, shaped by light rather than by physical structure. In this way, light serves as a means of concealment, not exposure. It allows creatures to move through open space with a reduced chance of detection, maintaining a presence that does not stand out against the faint illumination above. The glow is not meant to be seen, but to prevent seeing, to smooth away the contrast that would otherwise reveal them. Between one pulse and the next, a kind of structure begins to emerge, subtle and easy to overlook at first. The light is no longer random or purely reactive. It carries rhythm, spacing, and repetition, as though each appearance has been shaped to be recognized by something else nearby. What seems like a simple glow becomes part of an exchange, unfolding in brief intervals across the surrounding water. These signals vary in form, but they share a common precision. Some arrive as evenly spaced flashes, steady and measured, while others appear in irregular bursts, shifting in timing and intensity. The difference between them is not accidental. Each pattern is produced with control, often through specialized organs that can adjust brightness and duration with remarkable accuracy. The result is a sequence that can be repeated, altered, or paused, depending on the situation. In this way, light becomes a medium for communication. It allows organisms to send information across distances that physical contact cannot easily bridge. A single pulse may indicate presence, while a series of pulses can carry more specific meaning. The spacing between flashes, the length of each emission, even the gradual increase or decrease in intensity can all contribute to how the signal is interpreted. For some species, these patterns are essential during reproduction. Individuals release distinct sequences that identify them to potential partners, ensuring that energy is not wasted approaching the wrong organism. The signals must be precise enough to distinguish one species from another, even when many share the same general environment. Timing becomes especially important, as responses often depend on matching or answering a particular rhythm. Light also serves as a form of warning. Certain patterns signal that an organism may be unpalatable or capable of defense. These displays are not meant to attract, but to discourage interaction. A predator encountering such a signal may recognize it from previous experience or from inherited tendencies, choosing to avoid the source rather than engage with it. In this way, a brief sequence of light can prevent an encounter before it fully develops. Identification plays a role beyond mating or defense. In a space where visibility is limited and individuals may drift far from one another, recognizing members of the same species becomes important for maintaining social or behavioral patterns. Light provides a way to establish that recognition at a distance, allowing organisms to respond appropriately without direct contact. Each species develops its own characteristic pattern, sometimes referred to as a light signature. These signatures are shaped over long periods, refined through interactions that favor clarity and distinction. Even small variations can carry meaning, separating one signal from another in a complex field of overlapping emissions. The surrounding water becomes filled with these brief exchanges, each one specific to the organism that produces it. The effectiveness of this system depends on both production and perception. Many species possess visual or sensory adaptations that allow them to detect and interpret these patterns with high sensitivity. Some can distinguish subtle differences in timing or brightness, enabling them to respond only to the signals that matter to them. Others may filter out certain wavelengths, focusing on the range most relevant to their own communication. As these interactions repeat, a network forms, not fixed in place, but constantly shifting as organisms move through the water. Signals appear and disappear, intersecting, overlapping, and fading without leaving a trace. Yet within this constant motion, meaning persists, carried by patterns that are brief but precise. Light, in this context, becomes more than a physical phenomenon. It serves as a structured exchange, a way for life to convey information in an environment where other methods are limited. Each pulse contributes to a system that is both simple in its components and complex in its expression, shaped by countless interactions unfolding in the quiet of the deep. Color does not disappear all at once beneath the surface. It fades in layers, each wavelength slipping away at a different rate as water absorbs and scatters what passes through it. The process is gradual, yet consistent, shaping what can travel and what cannot. By the time depth increases beyond the upper zones, only a narrow range remains capable of moving any significant distance. Blue and green wavelengths persist longer than the rest. They pass through water with less loss, carrying farther before being absorbed. This physical property, rooted in how water interacts with light at the molecular level, defines the visual limits of the deep ocean. Even when external illumination is no longer present, the legacy of this filtering remains. It determines which colors are most effective when light is produced from within living bodies. As a result, most bioluminescent emissions fall within this same range. The glow produced by deep-sea organisms is often blue or green, not by coincidence, but because these wavelengths travel more efficiently through the surrounding water. A signal in this range can reach farther, remain clearer, and be detected with greater reliability. Over time, evolution favors these colors, reinforcing their presence across a wide variety of species. The sensory systems of many organisms align with this pattern. Visual pigments become tuned to the wavelengths that are most commonly encountered, increasing sensitivity to blue and green light while reducing response to others. This alignment creates a shared channel, a range where both emission and detection are optimized. Communication, attraction, and other interactions become more effective within this narrow band. Yet not all species remain within these limits. A smaller number produce light at longer wavelengths, extending into the red portion of the spectrum. This ability is far less common, and it requires specialized adaptations both in light production and in detection. Red light is absorbed quickly by water, traveling only short distances before fading. In most cases, it becomes effectively invisible beyond a limited range. For organisms capable of generating and perceiving this color, the limitation becomes an advantage. A predator using red bioluminescence can illuminate nearby space without revealing that illumination to others that lack sensitivity to those wavelengths. Prey that are adapted to detect blue and green signals may remain unaware of the red light surrounding them, unable to perceive what falls outside their visual range. This creates a private field of visibility. Within it, the predator gains access to information that remains hidden from others. Movement, position, and form can be observed without broadcasting that observation outward. The interaction becomes asymmetrical, shaped by differences in perception rather than differences in strength or speed. To support this strategy, some species develop visual systems capable of detecting red light, often through modified photoreceptor cells or additional pigments that extend their sensitivity. These adaptations are relatively rare, reflecting the specific conditions required for such a system to be effective. Where they do occur, they form a distinct layer within the broader network of light-based interactions. The distribution of color in the deep ocean is therefore not random. It reflects both the physical properties of water and the evolutionary responses of the organisms that inhabit it. Blue and green dominate because they travel well and are widely detected. Red appears less frequently, reserved for situations where limited range and reduced visibility provide a selective benefit. Within this spectrum, light remains a controlled resource, shaped not only by when it is used, but by the color in which it is expressed. Each wavelength carries its own constraints and advantages, influencing how signals move through space and how they are perceived by those that encounter them. Not every glow is meant to be seen by the one who creates it. In many cases, the organism producing the light has no ability to perceive it at all. There are no developed eyes, no structures capable of forming images, no internal sense that corresponds to what the light looks like once it leaves the body. The emission still occurs with precision, triggered at the right moment, shaped to serve a function that has nothing to do with the creature's own experience. This separation between production and perception is more common than it might seem. Some species carry light-producing organs along parts of their bodies that never enter their own field of view. Others lack visual systems entirely, relying instead on chemical or mechanical cues to navigate their surroundings. For them, light is not a sensory experience. It is an action, a process initiated by internal signals and completed without feedback from sight. The mechanisms behind this production are often highly controlled. Chemical reactions, typically involving molecules such as luciferin and enzymes like luciferase, generate light with remarkable efficiency. The reaction can be activated or suppressed depending on context, allowing the organism to release light only when it serves a purpose. This control does not require awareness of the outcome. It depends on biological regulation, shaped through generations rather than conscious adjustment. In this context, light becomes a tool in the most direct sense. It influences the behavior of other organisms, alters interactions, and contributes to survival, regardless of whether the producer can observe its effect. A flash may startle a nearby predator. A steady glow may attract attention. A pattern may signal identity. Each result unfolds externally, affecting the environment and the creatures within it, while the source remains unaware of the visual dimension of what it has created. This distinction reflects a broader principle in evolution. Traits are not selected based on how they are experienced internally, but on how they affect survival and reproduction. If a characteristic improves the likelihood of passing on genetic material, it persists, whether or not the organism understands it. Awareness is not a requirement. Function is enough. Over time, systems emerge that are finely tuned to produce specific outcomes. Light-producing structures are positioned where they will have the greatest effect, controlled by neural or chemical pathways that respond to external stimuli. The organism does not need to see the light to use it effectively. It only needs to produce it under the right conditions. There are even cases where light is directed away from the body, projected into the surrounding water in ways that maximize its influence on others. The orientation, intensity, and duration of the emission are shaped by selection pressures that favor certain responses in nearby organisms. These pressures operate without any requirement for the producer to perceive the signal it generates. For species that do possess visual systems, light may serve both as a tool and as a source of information. But for those without such systems, the role of light remains entirely external. It is part of how they interact with their environment, not how they interpret it internally. This creates a form of communication and interaction that exists independently of awareness. Signals are sent, responses are triggered, and outcomes are determined, all without the need for conscious perception. The process is continuous, unfolding through countless encounters where light shapes behavior on both sides of an interaction. In this way, the presence of light in the deep ocean is not tied to observation alone. It is embedded in the dynamics of survival, operating whether or not it is seen by the one who produces it. Inside certain bodies, the source of light does not originate from the animal itself, but from something smaller, something living within it. These internal partners are not temporary visitors or accidental passengers. They exist as stable populations, housed in carefully structured spaces that support their survival while allowing their unique ability to be used. These organisms are bacteria, microscopic and numerous, capable of producing light through their own biochemical processes. On their own, they drift freely in the ocean, their glow faint and dispersed. Within a host, however, their light becomes concentrated, shaped, and directed. The animal provides a protected environment, supplying nutrients and maintaining conditions that allow the bacteria to thrive. In return, the bacteria produce a steady, controllable source of illumination. The relationship is not random. It is highly specific, often involving particular bacterial species that associate with particular hosts. Over time, this connection becomes refined, forming a partnership where both sides depend on the other. The host cannot generate this kind of light without its internal population, and the bacteria gain a stable habitat that supports their continued growth. Within the body, specialized structures develop to house these organisms. These are not simple cavities, but organized organs with features that regulate the flow of nutrients, oxygen, and waste. The bacteria occupy these spaces in dense clusters, their combined activity producing a visible glow. The arrangement allows the host to concentrate the light into defined areas, shaping how and where it is emitted. Control remains with the host. Although the bacteria produce the light, the animal determines when it becomes visible. Some species can block or reveal the glow using shutters, layers of pigment, or changes in tissue orientation. Others adjust the internal conditions, altering oxygen levels or chemical signals to increase or decrease the intensity of the bacterial emission. In this way, the light is not constant but responsive, appearing only when it serves a function. This arrangement allows for a level of consistency that differs from internally generated light. The bacterial glow can be maintained over longer periods without requiring the host to invest as much energy directly into the chemical reaction. The cost is distributed across the partnership, with each participant contributing in a way that supports the whole. The presence of these internal populations also introduces a form of inheritance that extends beyond the host's own genetic material. In some species, bacteria are acquired from the surrounding environment during early development, guided by signals that ensure the correct partners are selected. In others, they are passed directly from parent to offspring, maintaining continuity across generations. This transfer preserves the relationship, allowing it to persist without interruption. The interaction between host and bacteria is dynamic. The host regulates population size, preventing overgrowth that could become harmful, while ensuring that enough individuals are present to produce sufficient light. The bacteria, in turn, respond to the conditions within the host, adjusting their activity in ways that maintain balance. This coordination unfolds without awareness, driven by biological processes that align the needs of both sides. Through this partnership, light becomes something that is shared rather than owned. It arises from cooperation, shaped by two forms of life working together within a single structure. The result is a system that combines stability with control, allowing the host to access a reliable source of illumination without producing it alone. In the deep ocean, where efficiency shapes every function, such arrangements offer a clear advantage. They extend the range of what an organism can achieve, not by changing its own biology entirely, but by forming connections that expand its capabilities. At the boundary where water meets motion, a different kind of light begins to appear, not from deliberate control, but from contact itself. It does not wait for intention or timing. It responds to disturbance, emerging wherever the surface is broken, wherever something passes through with enough force to shift the surrounding fluid. In these moments, the ocean reveals a glow that seems to rise directly from the water. This phenomenon is driven by vast populations of microscopic organisms drifting near the surface, many of them single-celled plankton. Within their tiny bodies, chemical systems lie ready to react when mechanical stress is detected. A sudden change in pressure, the friction of water moving past them, or the turbulence created by passing objects can trigger a rapid emission of light. The response is immediate, unfolding in countless individuals at once. A single movement can set off a chain of reactions. As something moves through the water, it disturbs one group of plankton, which flash briefly in response. That disturbance spreads outward, reaching neighboring organisms that react in turn. The result is a wave of light that follows the path of motion, outlining its shape for a brief instant before fading back into darkness. Along coastlines, this effect can become especially pronounced. Waves breaking against the shore create constant turbulence, repeatedly triggering the plankton suspended in the upper layers. Each crest and collapse produces a new burst of light, tracing the edges of the water as it moves. The shoreline becomes defined not only by sound and motion, but by a shifting line of soft illumination that appears and disappears with each passing wave. When larger movements occur, the scale of the response increases. A swimmer passing through such waters may leave behind glowing trails that follow the motion of arms and legs. The wake of a boat can stretch into long, luminous patterns, marking its path across the surface. Even the movement of fish beneath the water can be revealed by faint flashes that trace their passage, briefly exposing activity that would otherwise remain hidden. Unlike other forms of bioluminescence, this light is not shaped by complex behavior or specialized structures designed for communication or concealment. It arises from a more direct interaction between organism and environment. The plankton do not choose when to glow in the same controlled way as larger animals. Instead, their response is tied to physical disturbance, a reflex embedded in their biology. The purpose of this reaction is still connected to survival. When triggered, the sudden burst of light may startle or distract potential predators, or it may draw the attention of larger organisms that in turn disrupt the original threat. The exact outcome depends on the context, but the mechanism remains consistent. Light appears at the moment of disturbance, altering the interaction in ways that can shift the balance of risk. Because these organisms exist in such large numbers, their combined response creates one of the most visible expressions of bioluminescence in the ocean. It can be observed from above the surface, turning sections of water into fields of faint, shifting brightness. The scale is not limited to individual encounters, but extends across entire stretches of coastline or open sea, wherever conditions allow these plankton to gather. In these places, the ocean seems to carry a hidden layer just beneath its surface, one that becomes visible only when touched or moved. Each disturbance reveals it briefly, a fleeting pattern of light shaped by motion, then returns it to stillness. Every emission carries a cost that cannot be ignored. Within these depths, energy does not circulate freely or renew itself in predictable ways. It arrives in fragments, irregular and limited, and once used, it must be replaced through processes that are slow and uncertain. Under these conditions, even small expenditures become significant, and repeated actions must justify their place in the organism's survival. Producing light is not a passive event. It requires a sequence of chemical reactions, coordinated and sustained by the organism's internal systems. Molecules must be synthesized, stored, and activated at the right moment. Enzymes facilitate the reaction, converting chemical energy into visible photons with remarkable efficiency, yet efficiency does not mean absence of cost. Each reaction draws from reserves that are not easily replenished. In environments where food is scarce, these reserves are carefully managed. Energy supports movement, growth, repair, and reproduction, all of which compete for the same limited supply. Introducing light production into this balance adds another demand, one that must prove its value over time. If the benefit is too small or too inconsistent, the trait will not persist across generations. This constraint shapes how bioluminescence is expressed. Light is rarely continuous without purpose. Instead, it appears in controlled bursts, brief pulses, or carefully maintained glows that are used only when necessary. The duration and intensity are adjusted to match the situation, minimizing waste while maximizing effect. Each emission is measured against its potential outcome, whether that outcome involves avoiding a threat, securing food, or interacting with others. The structures responsible for producing light reflect this need for efficiency. Photophores and other light-emitting organs are often designed to focus and direct the glow, reducing loss into surrounding space. Reflective layers may enhance brightness without increasing energy input, while pigments can shape the direction of emission. These features ensure that as much of the produced light as possible contributes to its intended purpose. In species that rely on internal chemical reactions, the process itself has evolved toward high efficiency. The conversion of chemical energy into light occurs with minimal heat loss, making it one of the most effective biological systems for producing visible radiation. Even so, the resources required to maintain the necessary molecules and enzymes remain part of the overall cost. For organisms that depend on symbiotic bacteria, the energy balance takes a different form. The host supplies nutrients to support the bacterial population, which in turn produces light. This arrangement spreads the cost across two systems, but it does not eliminate it. The host must still invest in maintaining the environment that allows the bacteria to function, and that investment must yield a return in terms of survival or reproduction. Over time, natural selection refines these systems, favoring individuals that use light in ways that consistently provide an advantage. Inefficient or unnecessary emissions are reduced or eliminated, while effective patterns are preserved and enhanced. The result is a set of behaviors and structures that are tightly aligned with the conditions in which they operate. This refinement can be seen in the timing of light production. Many organisms emit light only in response to specific triggers, such as the approach of another organism or a change in the surrounding environment. By linking emission to these triggers, they avoid unnecessary expenditure, ensuring that energy is used only when it can influence an outcome. In this setting, bioluminescence becomes a highly optimized system, shaped by the constant pressure to conserve and allocate limited resources. Its persistence across so many species reflects not abundance, but precision, a balance maintained through countless interactions where the cost of light is weighed against its ability to alter the course of survival. Across these depths, encounters do not happen often, yet when they do, they carry a weight that shapes everything that follows. Long intervals may pass without contact, each organism moving through its own path, guided by faint cues and limited information. Then, without warning, two trajectories intersect. In that brief convergence, the balance between survival and loss becomes immediate. This environment is not defined by emptiness, but by distance. Life is present, distributed across vast spaces, each individual separated by stretches of water that conceal as much as they contain. The result is a system where interactions are infrequent, yet decisive. There is little room for error when an opportunity appears, whether that opportunity is to capture food or to avoid becoming it. Within this framework, a constant tension persists. Predators search, often patiently, relying on signals that may only appear for an instant. Prey move with equal care, minimizing exposure while remaining responsive to changes around them. Neither side holds a permanent advantage. Each adapts in response to the other, shaping behaviors that reflect an ongoing exchange rather than a fixed outcome. Light becomes central within this exchange. It offers a way to influence encounters before physical contact occurs, altering the conditions under which decisions are made. For predators, it extends reach beyond immediate proximity, allowing them to attract, reveal, or disrupt. For prey, it provides methods to conceal, confuse, or redirect. In both cases, the effect is not guaranteed, but it shifts probabilities in subtle ways that accumulate over time. The interaction is continuous, even when individuals are far apart. Traits that prove effective in one encounter are carried forward, influencing future generations. A pattern of light that successfully attracts prey becomes more refined. A defensive flash that interrupts a pursuit becomes more precisely timed. Over many cycles, these small advantages shape the broader system, reinforcing behaviors that contribute to survival. This process does not move toward a final resolution. Instead, it maintains a dynamic balance where each adaptation on one side leads to adjustments on the other. Predators become more selective in how they use light, while prey develop responses that counter those strategies. The exchange remains active, a form of equilibrium sustained through constant change. The presence of light in this system is not incidental. It becomes one of the most effective tools available in a space where other forms of interaction are limited by distance and darkness. Its ability to travel, to appear and disappear, and to influence perception without direct contact gives it a unique role. It shapes encounters before they fully develop, affecting outcomes that would otherwise depend solely on movement or chance. Over time, this influence becomes embedded in the structure of life within these depths. Organisms evolve with the expectation that light will play a role in their interactions, whether as a signal to follow, a warning to avoid, or a disturbance to interpret. The system adjusts around this expectation, integrating light into the balance between hunting and hiding. What emerges is not a chaotic struggle, but a continuous negotiation. Each encounter reflects the accumulated effects of countless previous ones, guided by traits that have proven effective under these conditions. Light does not resolve the tension, but it becomes part of how that tension is managed, shaping the narrow margin where survival is determined. In this way, the widespread presence of bioluminescence reflects a deeper pattern, one defined by interaction rather than isolation, where every advantage, however small, contributes to the ongoing balance between those that seek and those that avoid. Space itself becomes a defining force in these depths, not as emptiness, but as separation. Organisms do not cluster closely together in most regions. Instead, they drift across wide intervals, each moving within its own narrow range, guided by currents that rarely bring individuals into immediate proximity. The water between them holds little to mark direction or distance, and without constant interaction, encounters become matters of chance rather than certainty. This separation shapes behavior in subtle but persistent ways. Movement alone is often not enough to locate another organism. Even when paths cross, the moment may pass unnoticed if there is no signal to draw attention. The environment does not naturally concentrate life into predictable spaces, and without some form of reach beyond the physical body, finding others becomes increasingly difficult. Light provides that reach. It extends presence outward, allowing an organism to announce itself across a distance that would otherwise remain silent. A controlled emission can travel through the surrounding water, carrying information that movement alone cannot convey. Even a brief pulse can signal that something is there, altering the paths of those nearby. For interactions related to feeding or avoidance, this extension is useful, but for reproduction, it becomes essential. The likelihood of two compatible individuals encountering each other without some form of signaling is low when distances are large and movement is slow. Without a mechanism to bridge that gap, opportunities to reproduce would diminish, affecting the continuity of the species over time. Light allows individuals to increase the probability of these encounters. By producing specific patterns or maintaining a steady glow under certain conditions, they create signals that can be detected from afar. These signals do not need to travel indefinitely. They only need to reach far enough to connect individuals whose paths might otherwise remain separate. The timing of these emissions often aligns with periods when the chance of encountering others is slightly higher, such as during vertical movements through the water column or within layers where populations become more concentrated. By combining movement with signaling, organisms increase the effectiveness of both, turning rare proximity into actual interaction. Detection plays an equal role in this process. Sensory systems evolve to recognize the signals that matter, filtering out irrelevant noise while remaining sensitive to the patterns associated with the same species. This selectivity ensures that energy is not wasted responding to every emission, but is focused on those that carry the highest relevance. Over time, this exchange creates a network of intermittent connections, not fixed in place, but forming and dissolving as organisms move through the water. Each signal represents a potential link, a brief extension of presence that may or may not lead to contact. The system does not guarantee success, but it increases the likelihood in a way that purely random encounters cannot achieve. The role of light in this context is not constant illumination, but targeted communication across space. It compensates for the lack of density, providing a way to bridge gaps that would otherwise remain untraveled. Without it, the distances between individuals would remain largely unbroken, limiting interaction to rare coincidences. In this environment, where separation is the default condition, light becomes a means of reducing that separation, not by bringing organisms closer physically, but by allowing them to reach one another across the intervening space. Reproduction unfolds within narrow windows where timing and recognition must align without hesitation. Individuals move through the same vast space, yet their paths intersect only briefly, and during those moments, clarity becomes essential. Without reliable ways to identify one another, the opportunity can pass without result, leaving no trace that it occurred. Light becomes the medium through which this clarity is achieved, not as a broad signal, but as a sequence shaped with precision, carrying information that distinguishes one individual from another. These signals are not continuous. They appear in specific intervals, arranged in patterns that must be recognized by those of the same species while remaining distinct from all others. Each emission is controlled in both duration and spacing. A pulse held too long or released too briefly may fail to convey the intended meaning. The interval between pulses matters just as much as the light itself, forming a rhythm that must be matched or answered. In some species, the exchange becomes a form of coordination, where one individual initiates a pattern and another responds with a corresponding sequence, aligning their signals over time. This process requires sensitivity on both sides. Detection systems must be capable of distinguishing subtle differences in timing and intensity, filtering out unrelated signals while remaining responsive to those that match the expected pattern. The surrounding environment may contain many sources of light, each carrying its own structure, and the ability to focus on the correct one becomes essential. The consequences of imprecision extend beyond missed opportunities. A signal that does not match the expected pattern may not only fail to attract a mate, but may draw the attention of something else entirely. Predators that have learned to associate certain light patterns with the presence of prey can respond to these signals, turning an attempt at reproduction into an unintended exposure. This risk shapes the evolution of these signaling systems. Patterns become more distinct, less likely to be confused with those of other species or with random emissions. Timing becomes more exact, reducing overlap with unrelated signals. The entire exchange is refined toward accuracy, minimizing ambiguity while maintaining enough variation to allow individuals to locate one another. In some cases, the reliance on light becomes so complete that reproduction cannot occur without it. Physical proximity alone is not enough. The correct signal must be present, and it must be recognized before any further interaction takes place. This dependence creates a system where communication precedes contact, ensuring that energy is directed toward interactions that have a higher likelihood of success. The process unfolds within the constraints of limited energy and sparse encounters. Signals are used sparingly, often restricted to periods when the probability of encountering another individual is slightly increased. Outside of these moments, the cost of emitting light may outweigh the benefit, and silence returns. Over time, these exchanges form a network of brief connections, each one carrying the potential to extend the continuity of the species. The patterns themselves become stable across generations, preserved through the success of those that produce and interpret them correctly. Small variations may emerge, but only those that maintain clarity and effectiveness persist. Within this system, light functions as a precise and essential language, one that must be used with care. It does not simply announce presence, but defines identity and intent in a space where other forms of communication are limited. Each signal carries weight, shaped by the balance between attraction and exposure, between connection and risk. A signal that travels outward does not choose who receives it. Once released, it moves through the surrounding water, carrying its presence to anything capable of detecting it. What was intended for one purpose can be intercepted by another, and in that moment, the same light that offers advantage can become a source of exposure. This dual nature shapes how bioluminescence is used. Every emission carries the possibility of being seen by more than its intended target. A pulse meant to attract may also reveal location. A defensive flash may interrupt one pursuit while inviting another. The boundaries between use and risk are not fixed, and they shift depending on who else is nearby. Predators adapt to this reality with careful attention. Some develop heightened sensitivity to faint signals, allowing them to detect even brief emissions from a distance. Others learn to associate certain patterns with the presence of prey, responding not to the organism itself, but to the light it produces. In these cases, the signal becomes a guide, leading directly to its source. The tracking does not always rely on continuous visibility. A single flash can establish a direction, a reference point that allows a predator to adjust its movement. If additional signals follow, even at irregular intervals, they can refine that path, narrowing the distance until contact becomes possible. The process unfolds quietly, guided by fragments of information that accumulate over time. For the organism producing the light, this creates a constraint that must be managed with precision. Emissions cannot be constant or careless. They must be timed, shaped, and limited in ways that reduce unintended detection. A glow held too long may provide more information than necessary. A pattern repeated too often may become predictable. Each use of light is weighed against the possibility of being followed. This balance leads to behaviors that emphasize control. Some species restrict their light production to moments when the immediate benefit outweighs the potential cost, such as during a sudden threat or a brief interaction. Others modify the intensity of their emissions, keeping them just strong enough to serve their purpose while minimizing their reach. Directional control also plays a role, with light being emitted in specific orientations that limit its spread into surrounding space. There are also cases where organisms interrupt their own signals, introducing irregularity to avoid forming patterns that could be recognized and tracked. The absence of light becomes part of the strategy, breaking continuity and reducing the amount of information available to observers. In this way, silence and emission work together, shaping how presence is revealed or concealed. The risk associated with light does not eliminate its use. Instead, it refines it. Traits that expose too much without sufficient benefit are reduced over time, while those that provide advantage with minimal risk are preserved. The result is a system where light is employed with care, integrated into behavior in ways that account for both its power and its danger. This careful use extends across many interactions. A signal intended to attract must remain distinct enough to be recognized, yet controlled enough to avoid drawing unwanted attention. A defensive flash must disrupt without lingering. Each application reflects a balance between visibility and concealment, between reaching outward and remaining hidden. In this environment, light is never neutral. It carries consequence with every appearance, shaping not only the immediate interaction, but the conditions under which future encounters will unfold. On land, light is not something that must be created to be used. It is already present, arriving each day in steady abundance, filling open spaces, reflecting from surfaces, and defining the shape of everything it touches. Even when it fades, it does so gradually, leaving behind dimness rather than complete absence. Under these conditions, visibility is rarely dependent on the organisms themselves. This constant presence changes the role that light can play. Signals that might stand out in darkness become less distinct against a bright background. A glow that would carry meaning in a lightless environment can be lost in the broader field of illumination on land. To be effective, it would need to compete with sunlight during the day and with residual ambient light at night, reducing its relative impact. Because of this, the advantages provided by bioluminescence are more limited. Many of the functions that light serves in the deep ocean, such as extending presence across distance or shaping interactions before contact are already fulfilled by ambient light on land. Visual systems can operate continuously without requiring organisms to generate their own illumination. Movement, color, and form are visible without additional effort. The cost of producing light remains, however. The same biochemical processes that generate light in marine environments would still require energy on land. Molecules must be synthesized, reactions controlled, and emissions regulated. In a setting where the benefit is reduced, this cost becomes harder to justify. Traits that consume energy without providing a consistent advantage are less likely to persist over time. As a result, bioluminescence appears less frequently in terrestrial ecosystems. It is not entirely absent, but it is restricted to specific niches where conditions allow it to retain value. Certain insects, such as fireflies, use light for communication, particularly in reproduction. Their signals are visible because they are used during periods of low ambient light, often at night, when their glow can stand out against the darkness. Even in these cases, the use of light is carefully timed and controlled. Emissions occur in brief intervals, often synchronized with environmental cues that maximize visibility while minimizing energy expenditure. The patterns are precise, shaped by the need to distinguish one signal from another within a relatively bright and variable environment. Other terrestrial organisms, including some fungi and small invertebrates, also produce light, often in shaded or enclosed spaces where ambient illumination is reduced. These occurrences remain limited in scope, reflecting the narrow conditions under which bioluminescence can provide a meaningful advantage outside the ocean. The contrast between land and deep ocean environments highlights how the value of a trait depends on the conditions in which it operates. In the ocean depths, where external light is absent and interactions occur across wide distances, producing light becomes a versatile and effective strategy. On land, where light is already available and visibility is less constrained, the same strategy offers fewer benefits. Over time, evolution reflects this difference. In environments where a trait provides clear advantages, it becomes widespread and refined. Where those advantages are diminished, the trait appears only in specialized forms, or not at all. The distribution of bioluminescence across Earth follows this pattern, shaped by the balance between cost and benefit in each setting. Light, therefore, is not simply a universal tool applied in the same way everywhere. Its role is defined by the environment, expanding or contracting based on what is already present. On land, its abundance reduces the need for organisms to create it themselves, limiting the conditions under which it becomes a useful addition to survival. Light does not move through water the way it moves through air. The difference is not subtle, and it begins at the smallest scales, where individual molecules interact with passing waves of energy. In air, light travels with relatively little resistance, maintaining its intensity and direction over long distances. In water, that same journey is interrupted constantly, altered by absorption and scattering that reshape both its reach and its clarity. As light enters water, part of it is absorbed, converted into heat, or used in chemical processes, while another part is redirected in multiple directions. This scattering breaks the straight path that light would otherwise follow, diffusing it into a broader field. The result is a rapid loss of intensity, even over short distances, and a softening of any defined beam or pattern. The effect becomes more pronounced as depth increases. With each additional layer, more light is removed from the system, either absorbed or scattered beyond useful paths. What remains is not a continuous flow, but a diminishing presence that fades quickly, leaving behind conditions where even strong sources cannot travel far without losing their strength. This behavior changes how light can be used. In an environment where signals do not carry over long distances, precision becomes more important than intensity. A controlled emission, directed and timed carefully, can achieve more than a broad, unfocused glow. The limited range ensures that light affects only a specific area, reducing unintended exposure while concentrating its effect where it is needed. Organisms adapt to these conditions by shaping their light accordingly. Structures that focus emission into narrow directions become advantageous, allowing signals to travel slightly farther in a chosen path rather than dispersing in all directions. Reflective surfaces within light-producing organs can enhance this focus, guiding photons outward in a more concentrated form. At the same time, the rapid fading of light creates a natural boundary around each emission. Signals do not persist indefinitely, and they do not fill the surrounding space beyond a certain limit. This containment allows organisms to interact within a defined range, creating localized exchanges that remain relatively isolated from distant observers. The scattering of light also influences how it is perceived. A signal may appear softer, less sharply defined, as its edges blend into the surrounding water. Detection systems must account for this diffusion, becoming sensitive not only to direct light, but to the subtle gradients created by scattered photons. Perception becomes attuned to these conditions, recognizing patterns even when they are partially dispersed. In this environment, the value of controlled light increases. Because light does not travel far, each emission must be used with intention. A brief pulse can carry enough information within a limited radius, reaching those close enough to detect it while remaining invisible beyond that range. This balance allows organisms to communicate, attract, or deter without extending their influence too widely. The physical properties of water therefore shape the role of light at a fundamental level. They limit its reach, alter its form, and define how it interacts with both the environment and the organisms within it. These constraints do not reduce the usefulness of light. Instead, they refine it, turning it into a precise tool adapted to conditions where distance and clarity are both restricted. Over time, this relationship between light and water becomes integrated into the behavior and structure of life in these depths. The way light moves through the environment determines how it is produced, how it is directed, and how it is interpreted, forming a system where physics and biology remain closely aligned. Far below the familiar layers of the ocean, the seafloor drops into long, narrow trenches that descend deeper than any other part of the planet's surface. These regions lie under immense pressure, where the weight of the overlying water compresses everything with a force that shapes every structure that exists there. Movement is slow, forms are specialized, and the environment remains stable in ways that are both constant and extreme. Within these depths, the conditions push life toward its limits. Temperatures remain close to freezing, chemical gradients replace many of the cues found elsewhere, and the arrival of organic material becomes even less predictable. Each organism that persists here does so through adaptations that allow it to withstand pressure that would collapse most forms of life, maintaining internal balance against forces that remain unchanging over time. Yet even here, where depth reaches its greatest extent, light does not disappear from the biological landscape. It continues to be produced, not as a relic from shallower regions, but as an active and functional part of life in these trenches. The presence of bioluminescence at such depths reflects a consistency that extends across the entire vertical span of the ocean. The mechanisms that generate light remain effective despite the surrounding pressure. Chemical reactions proceed within cells and specialized structures, producing photons that emerge into the water just as they do at lesser depths. The pressure does not prevent the reaction, nor does it eliminate the need for the outcomes that light provides. Instead, the systems that support bioluminescence are adjusted to operate under these conditions, maintaining their function within the constraints imposed by the environment. Organisms inhabiting these trenches often exhibit forms that differ from those found higher in the water column. Bodies may be more flexible, tissues adapted to resist compression, and metabolic processes tuned to operate efficiently at low temperatures. Within these adaptations, light production is integrated as part of a broader system that supports survival in a place where resources are limited and encounters remain infrequent. The persistence of light at these depths suggests that its role is not tied to any single layer of the ocean, but to the fundamental challenges that define life in darkness. Even under the most extreme conditions, the ability to influence interactions at a distance, to signal, to attract, or to alter perception remains valuable. The specific forms may vary, but the underlying function continues. Observations from deep-sea exploration have revealed organisms that emit light in these trench environments, confirming that bioluminescence extends to the deepest known habitats. These observations are often brief, captured through limited windows of exploration, yet they align with patterns seen throughout the ocean. The trait does not diminish with depth. It remains present, adapted, and functional. This continuity across such a wide range of conditions indicates that bioluminescence is not a peripheral characteristic, but a core component of how life operates in these environments. It persists not because conditions are favorable, but because it provides advantages that remain relevant even when those conditions become more extreme. In the deepest parts of the ocean, where pressure, temperature, and scarcity combine to create one of the most challenging environments on Earth, light continues to be produced and used. Its presence reflects a consistency that spans the entire system, linking organisms across depths through a shared reliance on a trait that remains effective, regardless of how far the descent continues. Far from any influence of the surface, there are regions of the ocean where connection to the world above fades almost entirely. These places exist beyond the reach of seasonal change, beyond the shifting patterns of day and night, beyond the steady rhythms that define life in more familiar environments. Time, as it is commonly experienced, loses its structure here. There is no cycle of light and darkness to mark its passage. In these isolated systems, the absence of external light is complete. There is no gradual dimming, no distant glow filtering down from above. The environment remains visually constant, unchanged across hours, days, and longer spans that pass without visible reference. Organisms living here do not experience transitions between brightness and shadow. Instead, they exist within a steady condition that does not vary. Without sunlight, the usual pathways that support life are replaced by alternatives. In some of these ecosystems, energy originates from chemical reactions rather than from light-driven processes. Compounds released from the Earth's interior, often through hydrothermal vents or cold seeps, provide the basis for food production. Microorganisms convert these chemicals into usable energy, forming the foundation for more complex forms of life. Within these environments, interactions still depend on the ability to detect and respond to one another. Yet the usual visual cues are absent. There are no silhouettes cast by overhead light, no shifting brightness to reveal movement. Under these conditions, any form of illumination must come from the organisms themselves. Light becomes not just a useful addition, but the only visual signal available. When it appears, it defines the space around it completely. A single emission can reveal form, position, and movement in a way that nothing else can. The surrounding darkness does not compete or interfere. It remains unchanged, providing a neutral background against which even the smallest signal becomes distinct. This exclusivity gives light a different role than it holds in environments where multiple sources of illumination exist. It is not one signal among many, it is the only one. Every emission carries information that cannot be replaced or supplemented by other visual cues. The presence or absence of light determines whether an organism can be seen at all. In these isolated systems, the use of light becomes closely tied to interaction. Signals are produced with care, shaped to convey specific information without extending beyond what is necessary. A brief glow can indicate presence, while a controlled pattern may carry more detailed meaning. Each emission stands alone, unblended with any external light, and therefore remains clear within its limited range. The absence of day and night also affects how these signals are used. There is no need to align behavior with external cycles of light. Instead, timing is governed by internal processes and immediate conditions. Signals may occur at any moment, determined by the needs of the organism rather than by changes in the environment. Over time, this leads to a system where light is fully integrated into the structure of interaction. It becomes the primary visual medium, replacing all others that are absent in these conditions. Organisms evolve with this constraint in mind, developing ways to produce and interpret light that match the stability of their surroundings. Within these isolated ecosystems, the relationship between light and life reaches a form that is both simple and complete. Light does not supplement the environment, it defines it. Not every signal resolves into a clear function. Amid the patterns that can be linked to attraction, defense, or recognition, there are others that appear without an obvious purpose, repeating in ways that do not align with known interactions. These sequences emerge, persist for a time, and then fade, leaving behind only the record of their occurrence without a clear explanation. Some of these patterns unfold with a regularity that suggests intention. Pulses may arrive in evenly spaced intervals, then shift abruptly into irregular bursts before returning to a steady rhythm. Others form sequences that seem too complex for simple signaling, combining variations in brightness and timing that do not correspond to known behaviors. The repetition implies structure, yet the structure resists interpretation. In certain observations, multiple individuals produce similar patterns simultaneously, creating synchronized displays that spread across a small area. The coordination appears too precise to be accidental, yet the purpose remains uncertain. There is no immediate indication of attraction or avoidance, no visible response that confirms what the signal is meant to achieve. These unexplained emissions are not rare exceptions. They occur often enough to be recognized as part of the broader system, yet they remain outside the categories that have been established through study. Each instance adds to a collection of observations that suggest there are aspects of light-based interaction that are not yet understood. The difficulty in interpreting these patterns comes in part from the limitations of observation. Encounters are brief, often captured through narrow windows of time and space. The context surrounding a signal may be incomplete, with key elements occurring outside the field of view or before recording begins. Without full sequences, the meaning behind a pattern can remain obscured. Even when observations are repeated, the same pattern may not appear in identical form. Variations in timing, intensity, or sequence can alter its structure, making it difficult to determine whether these differences represent distinct signals or variations of the same one. The complexity increases as more data is gathered, revealing layers that do not fit neatly into existing explanations. Researchers continue to study these signals, analyzing recordings, comparing patterns, and attempting to link them to known behaviors. Advances in technology allow for more detailed observation, capturing subtle variations that were previously missed. Yet with each new layer of detail, additional questions arise, expanding the range of possibilities rather than narrowing them. Some hypotheses suggest that these patterns may relate to interactions that are not immediately visible, such as responses to chemical cues or internal states that do not produce outward movement. Others propose that certain signals may serve multiple functions depending on context, making them difficult to classify within a single category. There is also the possibility that some patterns represent transitional behaviors, evolving forms that have not yet stabilized into consistent functions. Within this uncertainty, the presence of unexplained signals highlights the complexity of communication in these environments. Light is not limited to a fixed set of uses. It can be shaped in ways that extend beyond current understanding, forming patterns that carry meaning not yet recognized. The deep ocean remains a place where observation and interpretation are still unfolding. Each unexplained sequence adds to a growing body of evidence that the system is more intricate than it first appears. The patterns continue to emerge, repeating in the darkness, carrying information that has not yet been fully read, waiting within the quiet space between what is seen and what is understood. Time stretches differently in these depths, not marked by cycles, but by the pace of movement itself. Bodies drift, adjust, and glide with measured intention, conserving energy in a place where each motion carries a cost. Speed is rarely an advantage here. Instead, restraint defines survival, shaping actions into slow sequences that unfold without urgency. This reduced pace influences every interaction. When organisms move slowly, the chances of crossing paths decrease, extending the intervals between encounters. Long periods pass with little direct contact, each individual existing within its own narrow range of experience. The surrounding space remains largely undisturbed, holding distance between forms that may never meet. When encounters do occur, they carry a significance that reflects their rarity. There is little opportunity to repeat or correct a missed interaction. A single moment can determine whether energy is gained or lost, whether an organism continues or becomes part of another's survival. The stakes are not heightened through sudden action, but through the scarcity of chances. In such conditions, the outcome of an encounter depends on what can be perceived before contact is made. Movement alone provides limited information, especially when it unfolds slowly and without clear direction. Light, when introduced into this interaction, changes the balance. It allows information to pass between organisms in advance, shaping behavior before proximity becomes immediate. A brief emission can reveal presence, altering the course of movement for both sides. For a predator, it may guide attention toward a potential source of energy. For prey, it may disrupt or redirect an approach, creating a moment of uncertainty. In each case, the signal influences the interaction at a stage where adjustment is still possible. Because movement is slow, these signals have time to take effect. A pulse does not need to be followed by rapid motion to create a response. The interval between emission and reaction may extend longer than in more dynamic environments, allowing the signal to shape the encounter gradually. This slower exchange gives light a different kind of influence, one that unfolds over time rather than in sudden bursts. The rarity of encounters also means that signals must be effective when they occur. There is little room for error or inefficiency. A misjudged emission may not simply fail, it may represent a lost opportunity that will not return soon. Over time, this pressure refines how light is used, favoring patterns and behaviors that consistently produce favorable outcomes. In this environment, light becomes closely tied to decision points. It appears at moments where the direction of an interaction can still be altered, providing information that affects whether an organism approaches, withdraws, or changes course. The signal does not guarantee a particular outcome, but it shifts the balance, influencing the path that follows. The slow pace of life ensures that these interactions are not chaotic or overlapping. Each encounter stands apart, shaped by its own conditions and signals. Light, when used, becomes a central element within that moment, guiding the exchange in ways that extend beyond physical movement. Over time, this pattern creates a system where the importance of each interaction is amplified by its rarity. Light does not simply assist in these encounters. It becomes one of the primary factors that determine how they unfold, influencing outcomes in a space where opportunities are few and consequences remain closely tied to each one. Within each organism, energy moves through a quiet accounting system, one that never pauses and never allows excess to linger. Every process draws from the same limited reserve, whether it supports movement, repair, growth, or the subtle chemistry that produces light. Nothing is separate from this balance. Each action is part of a continuous exchange where gain and loss are closely tied. Light, for all its usefulness, exists within this system as a deliberate expense. It does not arise without cost, and it cannot be sustained indefinitely without consequence. The resources required to generate even a brief emission must be drawn from stores that may take long periods to rebuild. In an environment where new energy arrives slowly and unpredictably, this withdrawal is always significant. Organisms navigate this constraint through careful allocation. The decision to produce light is not made in isolation, but in relation to everything else that must be maintained. A burst of illumination may increase the chance of securing food, yet it also reduces the energy available for future needs. A defensive flash may prevent immediate danger while leaving fewer reserves for recovery afterward. Each use of light is part of a larger calculation that unfolds continuously. This balance becomes especially critical when resources are scarce. Extended periods may pass without sufficient intake to replenish what has been spent. During these times, the margin for error narrows. An unnecessary emission can represent a loss that cannot be quickly replaced, affecting the organism's ability to respond to future challenges. Survival depends not only on having the ability to produce light, but on knowing when not to use it. Efficiency emerges as the guiding principle. Systems that convert energy into light with minimal waste are favored, allowing organisms to achieve their goals without excessive expenditure. The chemical pathways involved in bioluminescence are already among the most efficient known, producing light with very little heat loss. Even so, the broader system must ensure that each emission contributes meaningfully to survival. Structures that enhance the effectiveness of light play an important role in this efficiency. Reflective layers, directional organs, and pigments that control emission all serve to maximize the impact of each photon produced. By focusing light where it is needed, these adaptations reduce the total energy required to achieve the same effect. The result is a system that does more with less, aligning output with purpose. Behavior also reflects this need for balance. Many organisms restrict their use of light to specific situations, often triggered by immediate conditions rather than used continuously. The timing of an emission can determine whether it leads to a beneficial outcome or becomes a wasted expense. By linking light production to precise moments, organisms reduce unnecessary loss while preserving the ability to respond when it matters most. The trade-offs extend beyond individual actions. Over longer periods, energy invested in light must be weighed against other demands such as reproduction. Allocating too much toward one function can limit the ability to sustain another. Evolution shapes these allocations over generations, favoring strategies that maintain a stable balance between competing needs. In this environment, survival is not defined by abundance, but by the careful management of limited resources. Light remains a valuable tool, yet it exists within boundaries that cannot be ignored. Each emission reflects a decision embedded in biology, one that balances immediate benefit against long-term stability. Through this continuous exchange, bioluminescence becomes not just a trait, but a finely tuned system, shaped by the need to conserve, allocate, and use energy with precision in a place where nothing is given freely. Long before instruments could descend into the ocean's depths, the first encounters with living light occurred at the surface, carried into human experience by those who traveled across open water. On certain nights, under specific conditions, the sea itself would begin to glow, not in isolated flashes, but across wide stretches that followed the motion of waves and the passage of ships. The effect appeared without warning, transforming familiar waters into something that seemed to move with its own quiet radiance. Sailors recorded these observations in logs and journals, describing seas that shimmered beneath the hull, trails of light that followed behind, and disturbances that left luminous patterns in their wake. The descriptions varied, yet they shared a common element, a sense that the water itself had taken on properties that did not align with everyday experience. These accounts were often detailed, grounded in direct observation, and repeated across different regions and time periods. Despite this consistency, early explanations struggled to take hold. Without a clear understanding of the mechanisms involved, the phenomenon was sometimes attributed to reflection, to chemical processes unrelated to life, or dismissed as exaggeration shaped by the unfamiliar conditions of long voyages. The idea that living organisms could produce visible light on such a scale was not immediately accepted. As exploration continued, reports accumulated. Different crews, traveling independently, described similar experiences, noting the same patterns of glowing water triggered by movement. Over time, the repetition of these accounts began to shift perception. What had once been treated as isolated or uncertain observations became part of a broader pattern that required explanation. The development of scientific methods provided new ways to investigate these reports. Samples of seawater were collected and examined, revealing the presence of microscopic organisms capable of producing light when disturbed. Controlled observations demonstrated that the glow could be triggered consistently under specific conditions, linking the visible phenomenon to biological processes rather than external factors. This transition from observation to understanding unfolded gradually. Early studies focused on identifying the organisms involved, examining their structure and behavior, and determining the chemical reactions responsible for light production. The connection between mechanical disturbance and emission became clearer, explaining why waves, currents, and moving objects could trigger widespread illumination. As knowledge expanded, the phenomenon once described in journals became part of a larger framework of bioluminescence. The glowing seas observed by sailors were recognized as one expression of a trait that extended far beyond the surface, connecting visible events to processes occurring throughout the ocean. The surface displays provided a point of entry, a way for human observers to encounter a system that otherwise remained hidden. The shift in understanding also changed how these events were interpreted. What had once been seen as unusual or inexplicable became evidence of a widespread biological capability. The glow was no longer a curiosity, but a signal of underlying activity, a visible trace of interactions occurring at a scale that could be directly observed. Modern research continues to build on these early observations, using advanced tools to study the organisms involved and the conditions that influence their behavior. Yet the initial encounters remain significant, not only for what they revealed, but for how they shaped the path of inquiry. The records kept by sailors, grounded in direct experience, provided the first consistent evidence that light could emerge from the ocean itself, guiding later efforts to understand its origin. Through this progression, a phenomenon once met with uncertainty became part of a broader scientific understanding, linking human observation with the deeper processes that define life in the ocean. Through reinforced glass and quiet machinery, human presence has begun to extend into regions that were once accessible only through brief glimpses and indirect evidence. Descent now occurs slowly and deliberately, carried by submersibles designed to withstand the pressure that defines these depths. Within these vessels, observation becomes continuous, no longer limited to fragments brought back to the surface, but unfolding in real time as the environment reveals itself moment by moment. As these submersibles move through the water, their lights are often dimmed or carefully controlled, allowing the surrounding space to remain as undisturbed as possible. In that controlled darkness, the first signs of life appear not as solid forms, but as points of illumination that emerge, shift, and vanish with subtle timing. The ability to witness these events directly changes the nature of understanding. What was once inferred can now be seen as it happens. Cameras mounted on these vehicles capture sequences that were previously beyond reach. High-sensitivity sensors record faint emissions, preserving details of timing, intensity, and pattern that might otherwise be missed. These recordings reveal interactions unfolding over seconds or minutes, showing how organisms respond to one another through light in ways that cannot be reconstructed from isolated samples. The presence of these recording systems allows for repeated observation. Patterns can be compared across different encounters, building a more complete picture of behavior. Signals that once seemed isolated can be recognized as part of a larger system, connected through similarities in structure and response. The accumulation of these observations gradually transforms uncertainty into knowledge. At the same time, exploration continues to uncover forms of life that had not been documented before. New species are observed during these descents, identified through their structure, behavior, and the ways in which they produce and use light. Each discovery adds to the range of known adaptations, expanding the understanding of how bioluminescence operates across different environments and conditions. Many of these newly observed organisms exhibit features that challenge earlier assumptions. Some display combinations of traits that do not fit established categories, while others reveal entirely new approaches to producing or controlling light. These findings suggest that the diversity of bioluminescent systems is broader than previously recognized, shaped by variations that continue to emerge as exploration deepens. The ability to observe life in its natural context also provides insight into how these organisms interact with their environment. Movements, signals, and responses can be seen as part of continuous sequences rather than isolated events. This context allows researchers to understand not only what occurs, but how and when it occurs, linking behavior to the surrounding conditions. Advances in technology continue to refine this process. Improvements in imaging, data collection, and vehicle design extend the range and duration of exploration. Longer missions allow for observation over extended periods, capturing changes that occur over time rather than in brief snapshots. Each improvement adds clarity, revealing details that were previously hidden. Despite these advances, much of the ocean remains unexplored. The regions that have been observed represent only a fraction of the total environment. Each descent has the potential to reveal something new, not because the system is incomplete, but because the scale of what exists is so large that it cannot be fully captured at once. Modern exploration, therefore, does not conclude the process of discovery. It expands it, providing tools that allow for deeper and more detailed observation while revealing how much remains beyond current reach. Within this ongoing effort, light continues to serve as a guide, marking the presence of life in a space that would otherwise remain unseen. Maps of the ocean floor exist, but they carry a quiet incompleteness, outlines drawn from distant measurements rather than direct presence. Large areas are charted in broad forms, yet the details within those forms remain largely untouched. Beneath these outlines lies a space that has been visited only in fragments, where each descent reveals a narrow corridor of understanding surrounded by vast regions that remain unseen. The scale of this environment makes comprehensive exploration difficult. The deep ocean covers the majority of the planet, extending across distances that cannot be fully surveyed with current methods. Each expedition captures a limited portion, often separated by long stretches that have never been directly observed. The result is a patchwork of knowledge composed of individual observations that do not yet connect into a complete picture. Within this incomplete view, bioluminescent life appears as a recurring feature present wherever observation occurs. Yet the forms that have been recorded likely represent only a small fraction of what exists. Many species remain undocumented, their structures, behaviors, and patterns of light production unknown. The diversity that has already been identified suggests that there are many more variations yet to be encountered. The process of discovery continues to expand this range. Each time new regions are explored, organisms are observed that do not match known classifications. Some display familiar traits combined in unexpected ways, while others introduce entirely new approaches to producing or using light. These findings indicate that the system is far more varied than current records can fully represent. The difficulty in reaching these environments contributes to this gap. Depth, pressure, and distance impose constraints that limit how often and how widely exploration can occur. Equipment must be carefully designed, missions precisely planned, and each descent carries inherent challenges. These factors slow the pace of discovery, ensuring that large portions of the ocean remain beyond direct observation. Even in areas that have been visited, observation is often brief. A submersible may pass through a region once, capturing a limited sequence of events before moving on. The conditions present during that visit may differ from those at other times, leaving certain behaviors unrecorded. The absence of continuous observation means that much of what occurs remains unobserved, existing outside the moments that have been captured. This limitation extends to the understanding of interactions. While individual signals and behaviors can be recorded, the broader context in which they occur may remain incomplete. Patterns that require longer observation or repeated encounters may not yet be fully recognized. The system reveals itself gradually, each new piece adding to a structure that is still forming. The hidden nature of this world is not due to its lack of activity, but to the difficulty of accessing it. Life continues across these depths, interacting, adapting, and producing light in ways that may never have been seen. The absence of observation does not imply absence of presence. It reflects the limits of current reach. As exploration advances, the boundary between known and unknown shifts, but it does not disappear. Each discovery highlights both what has been found and what remains beyond view. The proportion of unexplored space remains large, suggesting that the majority of this environment and the life within it is still hidden. Within this vast and largely unobserved system, bioluminescence continues to play its role, shaping interactions in ways that extend far beyond the areas that have been studied. The light that has been seen offers only a partial glimpse of a much broader phenomenon, one that persists across a world that remains mostly out of sight. In the absence of any fixed reference, orientation shifts from surface and horizon to the arrangement of light itself. There is no up or down that can be confirmed by sight, no stable boundary to anchor perception. Instead, points of illumination appear within the surrounding space, scattered at varying distances, each one marking the presence of something living. These points do not remain still. They drift, pulse, and fade, tracing paths that cross and separate over time. Some move slowly, maintaining a steady glow that slides across the field of view. Others appear briefly, flashing once or in short sequences before disappearing again. The overall effect is not static, but dynamic, a pattern that continuously reshapes itself as organisms move through the water. The comparison to a sky filled with stars arises naturally from this arrangement, yet the resemblance is only partial. In the night sky, stars hold fixed positions relative to one another, their patterns changing only over long periods. Here, the points of light are in constant motion, each one following its own path, influenced by currents and internal movement. The patterns they form exist only for moments before dissolving into new configurations. This motion replaces stillness as the defining feature of the environment. The space does not hold a permanent structure. It shifts continuously, with each light contributing to a transient arrangement that reflects the movement of the organisms producing it. The absence of fixed reference points means that perception adapts to this fluidity, recognizing patterns that exist only briefly. In this setting, distance is difficult to judge. A point of light may be close or far, its apparent size and brightness shaped by factors that are not immediately clear. Movement provides the only consistent cue, revealing relative position through changes in direction and speed. As lights pass one another, their paths create temporary alignments that suggest structure, even as that structure quickly changes. The environment becomes a field of moving signals, each one carrying information while also contributing to the overall visual landscape. Interactions unfold within this field, guided by the appearance and disappearance of light. A signal may draw attention, then vanish, leaving behind only the memory of its position. Another may appear in response, creating a brief exchange that exists within a shifting frame. Over time, this constant motion creates an impression of a space that is both expansive and active. The darkness does not remain empty. It is filled with points of light that define its depth and extent. each one marking a moment of presence. The absence of external illumination allows these signals to stand out clearly, giving the environment a structure that is entirely shaped by the organisms within it. This structure is not imposed from outside. It arises from within the system, built from countless individual emissions that together form a continuously changing pattern. The ocean, in these depths, takes on the qualities of a self-contained world, where light defines both the boundaries and the interactions that occur within them. The resemblance to a sky is therefore not just visual, but conceptual. Both environments are defined by points of light within darkness, yet here those points are alive, moving, and responsive. The deep ocean becomes its own kind of universe, one where motion replaces stillness, and where each light contributes to a pattern that never settles into a fixed form. There comes a point where absence is no longer a condition, but a force that reshapes everything within it. In these depths, darkness does not simply surround life, it defines the limits of what is possible and quietly directs the paths evolution can take. Without any external source of illumination, there is nothing to inherit, nothing to rely on beyond what an organism can produce for itself. This absence removes an entire category of dependency. There are no cycles of day and night to follow, no shifting gradients of light to guide movement or behavior. Time becomes less tied to external cues and more to internal rhythms, slower and often irregular. In such an environment, the familiar anchors of surface life fade, replaced by systems that operate independently of sunlight. From this constraint, new forms of adaptation emerge. Vision, where it persists, becomes specialized, tuned not to broad illumination, but to brief and precise signals. Sensory systems expand in other directions as well, responding to pressure changes, faint chemical traces, or subtle vibrations carried through the water. Yet, even among these adaptations, the creation of light remains one of the most transformative. Here, light is no longer something encountered passively. It becomes an active process, a deliberate output shaped by biological mechanisms that convert chemical energy into visible signals. This shift alters its meaning. Light is not a background condition, but a controlled event, something that appears only when produced and disappears just as completely. The ability to generate light introduces a new dimension of control within an otherwise uniform darkness. Organisms can define their own visibility, choosing when to reveal presence and when to remain undetected. This control is often precise, regulated through specialized structures that adjust intensity, direction, and timing. The result is a form of interaction that depends entirely on internally generated signals. Over time, these capabilities lead to increasingly refined systems. Light production becomes integrated with behavior, linked to specific actions and responses. A brief pulse may correspond to movement, a steady glow to a particular state, a rapid sequence to an immediate need. Each pattern reflects a balance between cost and benefit, shaped by countless interactions across generations. The absence of sunlight also alters how energy is used and conserved. Every expenditure must be justified within a limited system where resources arrive slowly and unpredictably. The production of light, though costly, persists because it provides advantages that cannot be achieved through other means. It enables communication, misdirection, and detection in a space where none of these would otherwise be possible. In this way, darkness does not merely restrict life, it compels it toward innovation. Traits that might remain unnecessary or inefficient in brighter environments become essential here. The lack of external illumination creates a demand that can only be met through internal processes, encouraging solutions that are both efficient and highly specialized. As these solutions accumulate, the environment transforms from a passive void into an active system shaped by the organisms within it. Each instance of light contributes to a network of signals that define interactions and relationships. The darkness remains, unchanged in its absence, yet the space it creates is filled with responses that turn limitation into function. What emerges is not a diminished form of life, but one that has been redirected. Without sunlight to depend on, life learns to generate its own signals, to build its own moments of visibility. The darkness sets the terms, and within those terms, life responds by becoming something that does not wait for light, but makes it. Long before any surface horizon comes to mind, there is a quiet realization that the darkness below is not a void, but a presence shaped by living signals. What first appeared as absence gradually reveals itself as a different kind of fullness, one built not from reflected sunlight, but from countless organisms creating their own brief moments of visibility. The deep ocean holds no borrowed glow, only light that is made, released, and withdrawn by life itself. Across this immense space, illumination is not an exception. It is woven into survival, into movement, into the ways creatures meet and avoid one another. The earlier sense of emptiness fades into something more intricate, a system where light serves as both tool and language. It guides, conceals, attracts, and warns, often within the same fleeting instant. What seems delicate is in fact precise, shaped by pressures that leave little room for waste or error. In this environment, glowing is not decorative or accidental. It exists because the conditions demand it. The absence of sunlight removes all passive illumination, creating a setting where visibility must be generated rather than received. From this constraint, light becomes functional, refined over long spans of time into forms that serve specific purposes. Each pulse or shimmer carries intent, even when that intent remains beyond immediate understanding. The result is a world that feels quietly active, never still in the way darkness is often imagined. Points of light appear and vanish, tracing movements that hint at unseen interactions. Some signals are brief and singular. Others repeat in measured intervals, forming patterns that suggest recognition or response. Together, they create a shifting field that defines the space more clearly than any constant illumination could. There is a certain contrast in this arrangement. Light, often associated with openness and clarity, here becomes selective and controlled. It reveals only fragments, never the whole. It offers glimpses that must be interpreted quickly before they disappear. In this way, the deep ocean reshapes what light means, turning it into something that both informs and obscures, depending on how it is used. Over time, this perspective changes how the darkness itself is understood. It is no longer simply the absence of light, but the condition that makes these signals possible. Without it, the subtlety and precision of these interactions would lose their context. The darkness provides the backdrop against which every glow becomes meaningful, allowing even the faintest emission to stand out with clarity. Imagining such a place invites a quiet consideration of how light might be perceived if it were rare and entirely self-generated. In a setting where every glow is deliberate, its presence carries weight. It could feel like a guide, a warning, or something more ambiguous depending on the moment and the observer. The same signal might offer reassurance or uncertainty, shaped by the circumstances in which it appears. Within this living field, each organism contributes to a collective phenomenon that remains largely hidden from human view. The majority of this world continues beyond direct observation, its patterns unfolding in ways that are only beginning to be glimpsed through careful exploration. What has been seen so far suggests a system of remarkable complexity where light plays a central role in nearly every interaction. As the understanding of these depths slowly expands, so does the sense that much remains to be discovered. New observations continue to reveal behaviors and forms that were previously unknown, each one adding to the picture of a world defined by its own rules. The deep ocean remains distant, yet its presence is constant, a reminder that vast systems exist beyond everyday awareness. If this quiet landscape of living light has brought new ideas or moments of reflection, there is more waiting beneath the surface. You can share which details stayed with you or which part shifted how this environment is imagined. And if you would like to continue exploring these hidden worlds, you can subscribe for more slow journeys into the science of places rarely seen.